Okay, we start 3 bows to the Buddha. 1, 2, 3. And then we'll do the salutation to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, so good morning, everybody. And now we're going to be continuing with our reading, our study of the Anguttara Nikaya. These are the numerical discourses of the Buddha. And we're still in the Book of Forms. And now we come to Sutta number 171. Some parts of this sutta, I'll have to admit, are a bit strange to me, especially in the second part, but we will look through it and see what we can, how we can interpret the sutta, what we can get out of it. Okay, so the first part begins with a statement, and what we could find, what I see in this statement is almost a compressed formulation of some of the links in the formula of dependent origination. Let me just see if I could find a statement of the 8 of the 12, the familiar 12 links of dependent origination. Okay, so I just put up the 12, the formula with the 12 factors, but now let's look at this sutta. Okay, so the sutta begins by saying, when there is the body, then because of bodily volition, pleasure and pain arise internally. When there is speech, then because of verbal volition or volition of speech, pleasure and pain arise internally. When there is the mind, then because of mental volition, pleasure and pain arise internally, with ignorance itself as the condition, as the fundamental condition. Yes, I just will paste in the Pali for this. So we have several key words here that we have to sort of give special emphasis to. One is the noun sanchaitana, which is a prefix form of the word chaitana, which is what we translate as volition. Okay, then the other is, another key word is sukha dukkhaṃ. And then, of course, the other key word is avijja, ignorance. And so the text tells us that ignorance is the underlying condition here. And with ignorance as condition, there occurs volition. Volition in three modes through what are called the three doors or gates of action. That's body, speech, and mind. And volition, of course, is a mental factor. But that mental factor of volition can express itself by mobilizing or motivating action through body and speech, in which case we speak of bodily volition and verbal volition. And the instruments for expressing that volition are body and speech. So we could say that body and speech are the instruments or doors of action, but what actually generates the action, creates the action, is volition, a mental factor expressing itself through certain bodily actions, certain verbal actions. And then the third door of action is the mind itself. In this case, it's mano or mana. And so in this case, we have mental volition, which doesn't come to external expression through body or speech, but remains purely internal. For example, when one is formulating plans, entertaining desires, maybe dwelling on thoughts of resentment, anger, holding expectations, countless forms of purely mental volition. Okay, and then we have another key term here is pleasure and pleasure and pain. And pleasure and pain, if we take them together, what do they represent in terms of another technical Buddhist term, very common Buddhist term used in Buddhist thought? Pleasure and pain.
Feeling?
Exactly. Who said that?
Vinu?
Yeah.
Vinu? Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So pleasure and pain together represent feeling, and volition of body, speech, and mind. We can see these in the formula of dependent origination. Where in the formula of dependent origination will we find volition of body, speech, and mind?
Sankhara.
Say again?
Sankhara.
Right, sankhara. So in the English translation here, it's given as volitional activities. So these are sankhara. And the words in Pali are actually different. So the word that is translated as volition is sanchetana, or more precisely, chetana. And the word that's translated volitional activities is sankhara. But sankhara is explained as by way of chetana. And so we could see here when we come back to the table, we can see first ignorance is mentioned in its own right as it's mentioned last, but it's actually mentioned last. It says avijja pachayava, which means that with ignorance as a condition. So ignorance is the condition that underlies this whole process by which one engages in various activities of body and speech, or purely mental activities, activities that give rise to Vedana or feeling. So we could see we have ignorance, volitional activities, and feeling. And it seems, this is my own interpretation, that the way that there are two ways in which the volitional activities can give rise to feeling, to internal pleasure and pain. One way is in immediate association with the volitional activities. So let us say we engage in a certain activity of the body motivated by volition. Okay, so somebody, let us say, let's say the mind is dominated by anger and ill will. And through that anger and ill will, somebody expresses it through physical violence. He strikes another person, even goes further, stabbing them with a knife, or even to the utmost, shooting them with a gun. Okay, so in this case, we have unwholesome volitional activities with the underlying root, the motivation is ill will or hatred. And that will give rise, when that volition arises, it also brings along with it or generates a feeling. And the feeling that will accompany anger and ill will, generally, what kind of feeling will arise in immediate association with anger and ill will?
Unpleasant.
Yeah, so of the two choices, pleasure and pain, which will it be?
Relief immediately.
Pain.
Pain.
Yeah, so the immediate feeling that accompanies the anger and ill will is that of pain. But when somebody expresses, they release their anger and ill will. Let us say there's a person that you've built up some resentment towards over a few weeks. You're getting angry, and irritated by them. And finally, you can't restrain yourself anymore. So you strike out at them. And in the immediate aftermath of striking out, what kind of feeling will arise?
Relief.
So that relief, what kind of feeling?
Pleasure.
Yeah, so you get, sometimes there'll be a kind of pleasure that comes when you strike out against somebody. And a similar situation will apply with speech. Okay, so when that anger and ill will is building up, then you can't restrain it anymore. So as the anger and ill will are building up, accompanying those that volition will be purely, at this point, purely mental volition. So accompanying it, generally, the feeling will be dukkha vedana. As you're dwelling on your, you don't like the way that person comes into the room. You don't like the way they walk, even their walking is irritating. The way they sit down is irritating. When they have to express themselves, when they speak, even if they praise you and speak nicely to you, you start perceiving some kind of maybe sarcasm behind their praise. And so in the mind, dukkha vedana is building up along with those thoughts of anger and resentment. But then at a certain point, you can't restrain yourself. And so there arises some kind of some verbal volitional activity, which manifests itself through speech, as in this case, maybe some angry and harsh speech. And so the feeling that will accompany maybe the immediate expression of the anger and speech, maybe will be dukkha vedana, some kind of painful feeling. But immediately afterwards, shortly afterwards, you now have gotten that relief. All of that anger and ill will that had been building up maybe for days or weeks. Now finally you've cut that person down verbally. And so maybe there will come some kind of pleasant feeling arises. Okay, so this is in the case of unwholesome volitional activities. And we've been considering the case in which the underlying root is anger, ill will. Let's take the case where the underlying root is greed or lust. Okay, we have a man, he's building up I'm not going to mention any names, but the man, a very powerful governmental position, who's maybe been building up lustful feelings towards a younger female assistant of his, a younger colleague. Okay, so he sees her again and again, he finds her attractive. And so there builds up within the mind, when he's away from the office, he thinks of her, her image comes to mind, he dwells on her attractive features, beautiful hair, nice smile, very attractive figure, and so on. And so there is building up mano sancetana, mental volitional activities. Maybe he's having fantasies of going out with her, bringing her to his apartment, the secret apartment, since he's married and lives at home with his wife, but he keeps another apartment someplace. So now the fantasies are building up. So what kind of feeling will be building up along with these mental volitional activities?
Happiness.
Pain.
It's actually a pretty complex situation. Since sometimes when he's maybe indulging, completely immersed in the fantasies, there'll be pleasant feeling. So he's imagining himself, okay, bringing her over to his apartment, chatting her up, getting into bed with her, and so on and so on. So in those cases, there'll be a kind of pleasant feeling arising. But then when he realizes this is not the real situation and there are so many drawbacks, dangers that he could be creating for himself if other people find out about it, that he gets exposed, then dukkha vedana, painful feeling. Or even if he's not thinking of being exposed, but just the pain of recognizing how difficult it is to come on to her and all of the maybe taboos that surround relations between himself as a married man and this younger administrative assistant, might be a single woman, and that longing for her brings along a kind of painful feeling. Okay, but then, okay, he comes and decides he can't restrain himself anymore. So then he, maybe when he's alone with her, he engages in some kind of activity of speech, maybe tries to entice her in some way, in ways that are quite suggestive, quite explicit, or even we're going to assume he's not going to actually bring her over to full sexual activity, but through the body, maybe when they're alone in the room, he might stroke her, touch her in ways that are considered inappropriate. If they have to pose for a photograph, he might pet her in the back, and then the hand will start wandering to other places. And so at this time, maybe because of the bodily contact there and the verbal contact, there arises a feeling. And generally, what kind of feeling will that be?
Unwholesome sensual desire or sexual desire.
Well, that's the volitional state. But what is the feeling? Sukha, dukkha.
The feeling
Sukha,
of longing.
feeling of sukha.
Yeah, so it will be a pleasant feeling. Okay, so these are some cases with unwholesome activity. Let's try to think of some wholesome activity. Okay, so somebody, let's say bodily action. I'll go through it quickly. Let's say some verbal, wholesome volitional activity. Okay, somebody will be maybe giving a Dharma talk in which they're speaking praises of observing sila, observing precepts, or speaking praise of generosity, or speaking not a Dharma talk, but speaking kindly to another person. Say the other person is afflicted with sorrow for some reason, and one speaks to console that person, to lift up their spirits. Or the other person feels discouraged, and one encourages that person by telling them that they have good qualities, that they shouldn't underrate themselves, that they should recognize their strong points. And so in this case, one is engaging in good, wholesome volitional activities of speech. And then with body, some bodily volitional activities, probably giving, practicing generosity, offering some kind of material resources to somebody in need. Or in the case of a religious activity, it can be making offerings of food to monastics on alms round, or it can be maybe offering like lamps, incense, flowers at a shrine room. So those would be wholesome verbal bodily activities. And what kind of feelings will arise in immediate association with those kind of bodily and verbal activities?
Happy.
Yeah, generally one will be happy. So of the two, sukha or dukkha, what kind of feeling?
Sukha.
Sukha. So that will be pleasant feeling. Okay, so we could see that we have different types of volitions. We can make a simple distinction. Unwholesome. And these will be rooted in greed or lust, hatred, anger, and delusion. And then we have the wholesome, rooted in, usually we say non-greed or generosity. But in this case, making offerings, we could say expressing faith and devotion. When you're helping somebody in need, giving them words of encouragement or giving them a gift to lift up spirits when they're feeling sad. So this would be loving kindness.
Brahma Viharas.
And then the
Brahma Viharas. All the four Brahma Viharas.
yeah, at this point, I'm not calling on anybody to. Okay, and then we have non-delusion or wisdom. This would be maybe when, say, giving a Dhamma talk, one has to be using wisdom to explain the Dhamma. When listening to the Dhamma, that is helping to increase one's wisdom. Or when studying the Dhamma, that would be purely maybe mental activity or reflecting on the Dhamma, which is generating and increasing wisdom. Okay, and so the unwholesome activities can give rise, depending on circumstances, in immediate association to both pleasure and pleasure and pain. And the wholesome activities, I think maybe more often they tend to give rise in immediate association to pleasure. Yeah, I just have trouble thinking of circumstances where they might give rise to painful feelings, but just suppose it's possible. So we just put pain down as a possibility. Okay, so I said that there's two ways in which the volitional activities can give rise to feeling. One is through immediate association, but the other way in which the volition gives rise to the feeling, pleasure and pain, is across through over a period of time where there is a differential of time, an extension in time. And this is the relation between volition and feeling that's governed by the law of karma. Because there's a sutta, a very well-known sutta, which occurs in the Anguttara Nikaya, Book of Sixes. I think it's sutta number 63, though I'm not exactly sure, but you can look it up, where the Buddha says, it is volition that I call kama, for having will. And the word for will, chaitaya. One acts by body, speech, and mind. Yeah, the translation, we always lose things in translation because the word for volition is chaitana, but to express the verb we don't have a good English verb that
We
goes
still didn't
along.
hear from, you know who?
Yeah, please, I have to ask people online,
Oh.
mute, if you want to join the class, mute your microphones. If you have other things to attend to, then please leave the class. Don't carry on a conversation with an open mic with somebody else. It's disturbing the other participants in the class, and it's interfering with my own concentration. Okay, thank you. So it is volition. So volition, the Pali word chaitana, gets expressed in the verb chaitayati. So we don't have a good English verb to represent volition, so we have to use willed. But with willed, you don't see the connection with volition so obviously. For having volition, maybe we could say. We could make up the verb to volition. Having volition, one acts, and then the word for acts in Pali is karoti, and this is the verb from which the noun karma is derived. So the action is, the action of body, speech, and mind is itself the karma, and it is the volition that manifests, that is expressed through that action, that creates the karma. So in this case, the action, the bodily, verbal, and mental volition creates karma. And what the Buddha teaches about karma is that our willed actions, the actions that create that karma, have the potential to ripen, to mature at a later time, whether in this life, in the next life, or in later future lives, to ripen in the form of pleasant and painful experiences that are determined by the nature of the action itself. So this applies especially to the morally significant action, the ethically determinate action. So actions of body, speech, and mind spring from those volitions. And the volitions can be distinguished as unwholesome and wholesome. And so we saw that unwholesome volitions can result, can issue in, can generate the immediate feelings of pleasure and pain, either immediately along with the act itself or shortly thereafter as one reflects upon the action. But when we come to the long-term consequences, the karmic consequences, of unwholesome actions, what kind of feeling is going to arise through the karmic ripening of unwholesome volitions? Pleasure or pain, or both pleasure and pain? What do you think?
Pain, Bhante. Pain.
Exactly. So when unwholesome volitions ripen karmically in some kind of feeling, then it will be painful feelings, feelings of distress, unhappiness, even misery. And wholesome volitions in immediate association, there can be feelings, it seems to me generally feelings of pleasure, but in theory, perhaps feelings of pain. But when these wholesome volitions ripen karmically, when they bring about their karmic fruit, what kind of feeling will arise through the karmic maturation of the wholesome volitions?
Happy.
Bhante.
Yeah, so it has to be sukha, dukkha, pleasure or pain.
Happy. Sukha.
Okay.
Pleasure, Bhante. Pleasure.
So pleasant feelings. Well, I said pleasure. So we could call this happiness, good fortune. Yeah, we could put, well, actually, fortune itself is not a feeling. So happiness, joy, satisfaction, and so on.
I have a question regarding the anger as
Yeah,
an
go.
unwholesome thing. So many times if someone is doing something wrong to you, and if you don't express anger, then that wrong can continue and that can build up into long-term pain. So how should you view that?
Yeah, at this point, I don't want to go into these complex questions. I pretty much want to try to unpack now the meaning of the sutta itself, rather than to deal with those extended questions that develop.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, so now looking at the situation in terms of dependent origination, and what's significant, you see, is that ignorance will underlie both the ordinary certainly the ignorance will directly underlie the unwholesome volitional activities. So here we have ignorance as, maybe we can call this as a direct condition. Because all unwholesome activity directly springs from ignorance. But ignorance will also underlie the worldly or mundane wholesome volitional activities. As an indirect condition. And what's being suggested by this statement is that as long as ignorance remains in the sort of deep substratum of the mind, then when we engage in virtuous activities, that in activities motivated by wholesome volitions, those activities will still bring the accumulation of karma that will contribute to the extension, the prolongation of samsara, the cycle of repeated birth and death. So we still have to engage in order to overcome ignorance. We still have to restrain the unwholesome volitional activities and try to eliminate them through right effort. And we have to develop, reinforce, and strengthen the wholesome volitional activities, particularly the volitional activities involved in the practice of the 4 foundations of mindfulness, the 7 factors of enlightenment, the 8 factors of the Noble Eightfold Path, since those wholesome volitional activities that fall within the framework of the path will be building up the wisdom, insight that can eventually eliminate ignorance and all of the other associated defilements. But if we don't have that guidance of right view or the guidance of wisdom, and we just engage in the ordinary, mundane, wholesome volitions, those volitional activities, of course, of good, much more desirable than the unwholesome volitional activities, because first of all, these volitional activities help to purify, at least temporarily, to purify our minds, and they bring some kind of immediate satisfaction, and they create wholesome karma that will bring good fortune in the future. But it's not enough. We just can't remain satisfied with ordinary, mundane, wholesome volitional activities, even what they call meritorious activities. But we have to turn sort of the beam of attention back on the deep underlying root of ignorance, and then practice the factors of the path to weaken and eventually overcome ignorance. Okay, let's go on now with the sutta. And now we see some interesting distinctions being made here. Yeah, I should have actually put a paragraph break here. Yeah, these are here that we find an interesting distinction that gets incorporated into the Abhidhamma distinction among the Chittas. So here it says, either on one's own, one performs these bodily, verbal, or mental activities, or others make one engage in those bodily volitional activities. And then the same thing is said about the verbal activities. And the mental activities. So here we have a distinction, either on one's own, that means spontaneously, naturally, just through one's own innate disposition, one engages in these activities, or others make one generate these volitional activities. That is, others persuade you, convince you, put pressure on you, even compel you to engage in these activities. So let's see how this works in practice. Take some examples. Okay, so first we'll take the unwholesome side with regard to bodily activities. So I'm maybe an honest guy, but somebody comes along and says, okay, come, we're going to, why do you have to be such an honest guy? You know, you can get, you don't have to be so honest. If you really want to get a little richer, you could join us in this. We're going to, it's a colleague at work who's speaking to me. We're going to change the books, the company account books. And so we change them in the way that, you know, so we can funnel off some funds for ourselves, and we'll share the money that we channel off between us, and we can, you know, we can get rich that way. And so the person convinces me, and we work together. We doctor up the books of the company, and the executives don't detect anything wrong, but we're able to channel off a few $1,000s, which we divide between us. And in this way, like, I get a little richer. So originally I was an honest person, but somebody has persuaded me to engage in some kind of unwholesome bodily volitional activity, working to change the books. Okay, so that's on the unwholesome. That's on the unwholesome side. Let's say on the wholesome side, okay, suppose, okay, we have one person who's naturally has a lot of faith and devotion to the Sangha, and so they're very generous. And so when the monks come on alms round, they always have some food prepared and they offer it to the monks on the alms round. But he looks over and he sees that his neighbor, when the monks are going on alms round, even though he knows the neighbor is a Buddhist, but the neighbor doesn't come out to make any offerings. And so he goes over and talks to his neighbor and says, you know, it's part of our Buddhist tradition. We should be supporting the monastics and they depend on us for their food. And so when they come by on alms round, you should make offerings. That's a way to create merit for yourself, and you will be supporting the Sangha, the monastic order. And so in this way, persuaded by others, the neighbor prepares some food whenever the monks come on alms round and goes out and makes an offering. Maybe initially he doesn't do it with a great deal of happiness. Even though he's a traditional Buddhist, maybe he thinks these monks are not doing any work, they're just parasites living on the generosity of others. But after he starts making offerings, then he comes to feel an inner joy himself in supporting the Sangha. And then he sees that the monastics engage in a lot of work for the welfare of others. And so he comes to appreciate. Okay, so this is bodily activity on the wholesome side. And the same thing applies to verbal activity. You could fill in the details yourself. A little bit, okay. Yeah, I just thought of some example. Okay, on one's own, one performs a mental volitional activity. Let's try to think of an example on the unwholesome side. How, okay, naturally we give rise to our own volitional activities. We don't need much persuasion by others to give rise to mental activities. But let's see how others might make one give rise to different types of mental activities. First, on the unwholesome side. Can anybody give some example? Maybe can you think of some example how another person might persuade somebody to give rise to unwholesome mental states generated or governed by, let's say, by greed? Did somebody want to offer us an example? Okay, Sue, did you? I kept on seeing.
I mean, I didn't know if I can speak, but
Yeah, now you can speak.
yeah. I mean, I was hoping to say that, you know, if they say, yes, you know, you should, gamble and try to, you know, go to the casinos. Come on, we should go to the casinos and then gamble and you'll be rich and so on and so forth. That can generate greed.
Yeah, okay, that seems a good example. Though it seems in that case, well, eventually it's going to lead to bodily activity of gambling. You have to do it, I guess, either bodily or verbally. I'm trying to think if there's an example of purely mental generating greed. Xiaolun?
Yes, Bande. I think pretty much all advertisement serves that function of making people to become greedier.
Ah, that's very, very good example. Yeah.
Just the incessant message that if you buy more, you'll be happier. You buy more, you're happier.
Yeah, okay, that's really good. Okay. So it's the whole advertisement industry, billboards, online advertisement, television advertisement. So promoting greed in people. And take now the other unwholesome root, hatred. Did MSJ, did you have your hand raised? Yeah, you would have to click to unmute.
Yes, I did.
Yeah, okay.
It's the unsavory expectations of people. I think just those little thoughts that we get, and then somehow you decide to take action. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, but what I want is an example of somebody, one person, doing something to arouse ill will or hatred in another person, whereby that ill will or hatred is initially just an internal mental state.
Instigating. You're looking for the person that instigates. Correct?
Yeah, but I want a concrete example of how one person might be arousing hatred or ill will in somebody. Okay, let's say Brenda Walsh.
Thank you.
Bhante, I'm thinking about virtually any discussion on either side of the spectrum about politics these days can arouse those feelings.
Yeah, I think that's very, very true. Yeah, I'm thinking specifically now about the way this whole issue about wearing masks and getting vaccinations has become politicized, so that when, for example, a school board makes a decree that the students and teachers, everybody in the school should wear masks to protect the school staff and the students, then some groups will be infuriated by that and then arouse, and the fellow citizens try to arouse hatred towards them on that account. Okay, there are many, many ways in which it can arouse hatred. And how about delusion? Let's see how we can arouse, can one person arouse delusion in others?
By worshiping movie stars. Like fantasizing about movie stars, saying, hey man, you know, that girl is that movie star is very good looking, you know, we should go see that movie, so on, or something along those lines.
Okay, any other examples? I'm thinking of something that begins with a Q.
Incessantly telling somebody something that's wrong.
Yeah. Maybe particularly today was very widespread of these conspiracy theories, especially in the United States.
QAnon.
Yeah, as I said, I'm thinking of something that begins with a Q, and so that's what I was thinking of. Okay, so here we have the first distinction is on one's own or with others making one generate those particular volitions. Then we have another distinction made, and this is an interesting one. The distinction is either with, here I use the English expression clear comprehension, and let's see if we get the Pali. yeah, the Pali, the key words here, the words that mark the distinction is sampajano, is what is translated as clearly comprehending, and then not clearly comprehending is asampajano. And if you see these words and you know the Satipatthana Sutta, these are words that occur repeatedly in the Satipatthana system of exposition. So the monk kaye kai anupasi viharati, tapi sampajano sati ma. So clear comprehension is so often it's connected with mindfulness, so that we could say almost that when we use the English word mindfulness, it means a combination of sati and sampajano. So with clear comprehension, one performs a bodily activity conditioned by which pleasure and pain arise internally, or without clear comprehension, one performs a bodily volitional activity conditioned by which pleasure and pain arise internally. And then the same is said with regard to verbal activity and mental activity, purely mental activity. And the word sampajano, it's related to the idea of knowledge, knowing. And so within the Abhidharma, we have a distinction among the wholesome chittas between those which are jnana sampayutta, associated with knowledge, and jnana vipayutta, those which are dissociated from knowledge, but which are still wholesome. But an interesting question that could be raised, is it possible to perform an unwholesome activity with clear comprehension while knowing what one is doing? What do you think?
Yes.
Sylvia, did you have your hand raised?
No, I didn't.
Oh, okay. On phone?
Oh,
Did you-
no, that was earlier. I was thinking of creating hatred or
Okay,
encouraging
okay.
someone to have hatred.
Okay.
So, yeah.
On phone, did you want to?
Yeah, Bante, I was thinking of the story of a monk who in a boat that have a killer and he gonna kill everyone. And then the monk decided to kill that serial killer to save everyone, and
I
he
see.
comprehend his action. And
Yeah, that's a good example. I think it's a Jataka story about the Bodhisattva in the past life. But let's take something, not so dramatic as that. You don't have to take something as dramatic, just something from almost from everyday life. William Tyler, did you want to?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't think it's possible to know the truth and act in the other way. I think you're under illusion when you do that.
But can you do an unwholesome action while clearly aware of what one is doing?
I don't think so.
Okay. Anybody else have any idea of this?
I mean,
Dayani?
It's possible, Bante, for example, like lying.
Exactly. That's what I think also. In fact, this word sampajano occurs in the explanation of the violation of the fourth precept. So, in fact, I could find it in the suttas. Okay, this is the violation of the rule against lying. Let's see. Okay, let me copy and then paste. Okay, so it's speaking about somebody who is breaking the the fourth precept. So it says that attahetu, that means for his own benefit, or parahetu, for the benefit of somebody else, a friend or relative. Amisa kinchika hetu, for the benefit of some kind of trifling, little personal gain. Sampajana, you see the word, Musa basita hoti. He is one who knowingly, with clear comprehension of what he's doing, tells a lie, speaks falsely. So this is not a matter of sort of like knowing the liberating truth, but a matter of knowing what one is doing it deliberately with clear intention. And in that case, I would say one could certainly commit any of the unwholesome actions. So somebody can, with clear comprehension, deliberately, knowingly kill another person. We don't need that Jataka story, but an assassin who's hired to commit an assassination will act with, I would say, with an extremely acute sense of mindfulness and with clear comprehension, knowing exactly what he's doing at each step to pull off the assassination successfully, or a robbery, or in this case, lying. So I'd say that certainly one could commit unwholesome actions with this sampajana, with knowing what one is doing as one is doing it. And the opposite of that is asampajana, without clearly knowing what one is doing. Maybe this would be somebody like a child who spontaneously maybe is in a store with its mother and it likes a toy. And so it takes the toy off the shelf and puts it in its pocket and walks out. Or spontaneously, you're in an embarrassing situation. Somebody is accusing you of doing something wrong and you have done it. But then just spontaneously, to protect yourself, you tell a lie. I guess those would be examples. Okay, maybe, so we've gone through. Okay, I think at this point we've gone through the first part of the sutta. And we'll take the rest of the sutta next week. So let me just ask if there's any questions that have come up on anything we've covered so far. Sylvia, did you have your hand up for a question? Okay, then we take V.
Yeah, good morning, Bhante.
Okay, good morning.
In regards to the sankhara at the second link of the 12 dependent origination versus the sankhara in the 5 aggregates. For the 12 dependent origination, the sankhara, is it related to the latent tendency of past life that possible that one bring to this life?
The sankhara's independent origination.
Yes.
I'd say not directly. The sankharas in the formula of dependent origination are the volitional activities in which one has engaged. But what we would say is that those volitional activities, many of them will be motivated by the underlying tendencies, the latent tendencies that come along from a past life.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Sud.
Yeah, thank you for taking my question, Bhante. So is this why like Buddha proposes for practitioners to get away from the world from time to time? Like there's so many people trying to, I guess so many factors that are trying to push you towards unwholesome tendencies, greed, anger, and delusion. Like, I guess my question is, how can one still living in a lay life, let's say, progress on the path with so many, kind of factors pushing you towards in the opposite direction?
Yeah, that's where especially where one especially needs mindfulness and clear comprehension in the sense that's approaching wisdom to be able to distinguish what is unwholesome, what is wholesome, what are good motivations, what are harmful motivations. And so one has to be very, very careful. And one needs a great deal of discernment, the ability to distinguish, the ability to evaluate, and determination to remain committed to the wholesome and not to be swept away by the unwholesome. So that's why the Buddha's teaching can serve as a guide for living in the world, not only a guide for gaining liberation by renouncing the world. Okay, we'll go on. I have to answer the questions quickly because time is running out. So Lim Kim Hung.
Thank you, Bhante, for taking the question. My question is, let's say a person with a clear comprehension of the law of karma, the effect of karma, he committed an unwholesome act. Then another person without clear comprehension of the effect of karma also committed the same unwholesome act. So which of the two will suffer a more heavier karma?
I would say that the person who has an understanding of the working of karma has a better chance of rehabilitating himself. Perhaps the effect of the karma when it matures will be the same. That I can't say for sure. But the person who has some understanding of the working of karma, after doing an unwholesome action, will be able to understand that they've done something unwholesome. We're getting some noise in the background. I think it's coming.
Is it?
Yeah, I think it's coming from you. Yeah, that's better. Okay, the person who committed the unwholesome action but understands the working of karma, they'll still be subject to receiving the result of that karma if it gets the chance to mature. But because they know how karma works, they'll be motivated to engage in wholesome activities which might counteract the maturing of that karma, or if that karma does get the chance to mature, because they've done wholesome actions, when it matures, it will produce a weaker effect than somebody who just flows along in the stream of the unwholesome without understanding the working of the law of karma. That would be my understanding. Okay, Tian Xiong, unmute.
Good morning. In the discussion on the Sampojana on unwholesome activities, if we break it down into, says, unwholesome activities on based on greed and based on hatred, do you think that those activities based on hatred will not be kind of acting without that Sampojana? Because you will break it down to Abhidhamma, there's under the hatred, there's no associated with knowledge. It's actually aversion.
Yeah, what I would think is that what the Abhidhamma is speaking about is what is occurring at, maybe call this the microscopic level of individual chittas. And so in the individual chitta that's occurring with hatred, there won't be sampajanya or clear comprehension. But in the preparing for the action motivated by hatred, and afterwards, immediately afterwards, there could be chittas associated with knowledge. That would be the way that I would try to reconcile what is said in the suttas with what is said in the Abhidhamma.
Thank you.
Yeah, but it's just my conjecture how to reconcile them. Okay, we'll just have time for one more question. I'm sorry, but I will have to go up for the meal. So this will be Rena.
Yeah, so I have the same question about anger being an entirely unwholesome root, because that's very confusing from practical life. If someone is doing constant wrong to you, then if you don't act upon that anger, then it could lead to long-term pain. So how should we view this in terms of anger being a completely unwholesome root?
Maybe can you state the question again?
Yeah, so anger is considered to be an entirely unwholesome root.
Yeah.
But if you, in real life, this is confusing because if someone is doing constant wrong to you, and if you don't act upon that anger or express that anger or take action, then it can lead to long-term pain.
I see. Okay.
So how would you reconcile this with the teaching?
Yeah. The fact that you want to avoid acting from anger doesn't mean that you have to just passively accept whatever wrongdoing others inflict upon oneself. But one can, if you recognize that you're being abused or mistreated by others, you can still make your mind calm and collected, and then speak up even forcefully and oppose the other person and criticize them and try to correct them. But you wouldn't be doing so driven blindly by anger or hatred, but you'll be doing it calmly with mindfulness and with clear comprehension, even when you're speaking forcefully to defend yourself and protect yourself.
So you can take the content of the anger without the emotion, but the actual...
Exactly, yeah, that's a good way to express it. Yeah, you could take the content without the angry emotion, infusing it. Okay, we're going to have to stop now, and I'll continue with the sutta next time. So let us end with these. I'll just do a quick sharing of the merits. Sharing the merits with the devas, the nagas, and the other spirits. Akasata Tribhumata Deva Naga Medidika Punyantam Anumoditva Chirang Rakhantu Sasana. Akasata Tribhumata Deva Naga Medidika Punyantam Narumodipa Chirang Rakantu Desana Akasata Chabumata Devanaga Mahidika Punyantam Narumodipa Chirang Rakantu Mantaram Dukkha Pata Chani Dukkha Baya Pata Chani Baya Soka Pata Chani Soka Bantu Sabepi Panino. May those in suffering be free from suffering. May those in fear be free from fear. May those in sorrow be free from sorrow. May all living beings also be thus. Okay, thank you everybody for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante. Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you,
Thank you, Bhante.
Okay.
Thank you, Bhante. Have a good weekend.
Bow to Bhante.
Thank you and
Thank
blessings.
you, Bhante.
Okay.
Okay, I'm
Take
going
care,
to have to,
Bhante. Be safe,
Sadhu,
Bhante.
sadhu,
Yeah,
sadhu.
take care, Bhante.
okay, I'll have
Thank
to
you,
hang up.
Bye.
Be safe.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Bante.
Bye, Bhante. Thank
Okay,
you.
bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Sadhu.